Disney is continuing to look at the animated catalog for possible new movies to make, and launching today on Disney Plus is the latest one, Peter Pan and Wendy. Barrie's classic story of the boy who never grew up has inspired many filmmakers, and there's always the possibility of doing something new and interesting with the material. My favorite version is even Steven Spielberg's Hook, which centered on an adult Peter Pan. One might expect director David Lowery to follow the template of Disney's animated movie like several of the studio's remakes have done. However, he instead mostly ignores the animated film and appears to take a lot more inspiration from the original play. Even the songs are absent, with the exception of You Can Fly playing a few times as an instrumental track. I do appreciate that, as I don't find it interesting when the remakes just copy the animated movie. My favorite Disney remake is Cinderella, followed by Mulan, which did not follow the earlier films at all. Hearing that, you might expect me to really like Peter Pan and Wendy, and yet I was surprisingly underwhelmed by the movie. What was my main problem? For one thing, it's boring. I never thought it was possible to make a boring adaptation of Peter Pan, but this movie accomplished that. Part of the joy of the story comes from the sense of adventure and visiting a magical land where a child's imagination comes to life. There's a bit of that, but so much screen time is spent on the characters being mopey. Some of the most enjoyable parts of any version of Peter Pan come from seeing him being cheeky towards Captain Hook and messing with him. There are sporadic moments where that happens, but in almost all of his scenes, Peter is glum and depressed. And it's not just Peter. Wendy is depicted as sad through most of the movie too, as she struggles with the knowledge of having to grow up and comes across as strangely unlikable in her early scenes. Even Captain Hook has his own bouts of sadness, which come from a backstory that's slowly revealed. I feel like David Lowery wanted to make a movie that touched on childhood depression and the fear of growing up. I think it's great that he wanted to do that, and there is a way to do it that still fits with Barrie's story and characters. But the film seems to struggle with finding that right tonal balance, being fun and addressing these heavier themes. Even Neverland lacks a surprising amount of magic and wonder. A lot of locations, filmed primarily in Newfoundland, look like ordinary cliffs and forests. Even Peter and the Lost Boys' hideout did not give me the needed sense of awe. I wonder if the intent was to ground this world, but when I think of Neverland, grounded is the last thing that comes to mind. I've been criticizing a lot of this movie, but there are aspects I enjoyed, with even something this film managed to do that other adaptations have struggled with. The depiction of Tiger Lily and the indigenous people of Neverland is something that's either been done in a stereotypical and outdated manner, is not well cast in the acting department, or they're avoided altogether. Peter Pan and Wendy managed to avoid all of those, and I personally thought Tiger Lily was one of the best parts of the film. Elisa Wapanatak does a great job of playing her, shown here as almost a guardian for Peter who occasionally helps him when he's in trouble. I would have liked if she got more screen time, but she's well utilized when on screen. The Lost Boys are great too, with the young actors giving them plenty of likability. Something I want to mention that was especially neat is that one of the Lost Boys is played by Noah Matthews-Matovsky, an actor with Down syndrome. This is not something the film draws attention to though. He's just a proud member of the Lost Boys who helps Peter in his fight against the pirates. Jude Law does a good job as Captain Hook as well. The film does break a bit from tradition as Alan Tudyk plays Mr. Darling in this version, but that did not bother me at all. He brings the right amount of villainy when the role calls for it, and makes this interpretation of Hook his own. Jim Gaffigan gets a few amusing lines as Smee, and I like the interactions together. Yara Shahidi is a solid Tinkerbell, and I imagine this was a difficult role to play, as she had to act by herself and express herself almost entirely through her facial expressions and body movements. The few sword fights we get are kind of enjoyable, and Larry does some creative things with the flying sequence through London, although I wish they had turned the brightness up a tad during those scenes. Just because a scene is set at night does not mean it has to appear so dark. Otherwise, Peter Pan and Wendy just lacked a lot of the imaginative quality I associate with this story. David Lowery went for something a lot sadder, and while Barrie's story certainly delves into the psychology surrounding these young characters, I think this movie went overboard. Others may get more out of this adaptation, but I tend to prefer adventure and whimsy in my Peter Pan movies, which I felt this version had little of. I'm curious to know how you feel about this, so give Peter Pan and Wendy a watch on Disney Plus and write your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching.